Who is our neighbor? A retired Wall Street banker from Carmel Valley was driving his Cadillac Escalade on Highway 46 to go to Make America Great rally in Bakersfield when he was run off the road by a kind of biker gang that was also on the way to the same rally, just past where James Dean had his crash, if you know where that is. The bikers just went on, and the retired banker, although not seriously hurt, was trapped in his SUV, and there wasn't a lot of traffic going along the highway. A van with some Border Patrol officers went by, but they didn't stop because they were on their way to round up some undocumented aliens who were part of a farm labor strike in Delano. And a car with some construction workers heading to the MAGA rally didn't stop either because they didn't want to get involved. But a farm worker from Oaxaca who was without legal status here did stop and check. He called his cousin in Coalinga to come over with his tow truck, and when the cousin got there, the two of them got the guy out of the Cadillac and loaded the Cadillac onto the truck, and they took both the car and the driver to the Oaxacan cousin's sister-in-law's house, a little south of Coalinga. The sister-in-law luckily was a nurse, and she was able to patch up the guy from the injuries he did have. While her auntie made some food for everybody. And the brother of the cousin's girlfriend ran an auto body shop and was able to get the damaged car drivable by evening, but it was too late to get to the MAGA rally. Now, unknown to all of them, something else had happened a few miles down the road. A radical sociology professor from UC Santa Cruz, who was headed over to Delano to give a talk to striking farm workers, was run off the road by an old VW van that was driven by a Cal Poly dropout who was too stoned really to know where he was going or what had happened. The professor, too, was trapped in his car. It was a 1996 Volvo. Highway 46 can really be dangerous. A reporter for the Monterey County Weekly who was doing an in-depth story on Central Valley cannabis production saw the wreck, but he just passed by. And then a community organizer from Salinas working with the UFW and the COPA Interfaith Action Group on his way to the strike at Delano also passed by because he didn't want to miss this talk that was going to be given by a radical sociology professor from UCSC. But a construction worker on his way to the MAGA rally in Bakersfield did stop and help. He made sure the professor was okay, and then he called a friend who was a labor contractor in Coalinga who happened to have a tow truck, and the two of them were able to get the guy out of the Volvo and the Volvo on the truck, and they took the professor in his car to the fairly nearby home of an off-duty highway patrolman they both knew from Rotary Club, who arranged for the car repairs while his wife baked cookies. Who's our neighbor? The erasing of boundaries between us and them, whoever us and them may be, whatever stereotypes of people we may have in our mind, was one of the most radical and yet most central teachings of Jesus, as we hear in the gospel today. It was, in fact, the inclusion of the Gentiles without the requirement of circumcision that divided the Jewish community and the Christian communities way before the divinity of Jesus became an important issue. We've moved on in our epistle reading to the letter to the Colossians, but for a number of weeks now, we've been reading from St. Paul's letter to the Galatians, which focuses on this point and insists that Christians do not have to fulfill the Jewish law to be full members of the body. In Christ, he says there is no Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female. And you can add to that documented or undocumented, Trump supporter or Democratic socialist. Jesus said, you have heard it said, to love your friends and hate your enemies, but I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. I know that's not easy, to say the least. It's really an opus contra naturam, an act against our nature. For most of the 80,000 years since our species migrated out of Africa, probably before that, we've lived in relatively small groups of relatively related people. Other bands were encountered, I'm sure, with suspicion. Other tribes were avoided, and if not, they were attacked. Difference meant danger. But at that time, there weren't very many of us. Even just 10,000 years ago, there were spread out cities starting to pop up in China and India, Persia, Mesopotamia, along the Nile, and Egypt, but each one pretty much kept to their own place. And everyone else just roamed with the hunt as nomads or working out of small isolated villages. And so at that time there were maybe 67 million people, human beings or so on the planet. And they could pretty much avoid each other. But now there's 7 billion of us. Everywhere, in every climate and topography. And the tensions are rising with unavoidable interaction and reactive conflict. The accident of where you happen to have been born can make the difference between a pleasant life and a miserable life. It can even mean the difference between life and death. And it will get, I am certain, all the more desperate as sea levels rise, sending millions more fleeing. We haven't begun to see the refugee problem. And our fear of the other isn't just cultural or political or a matter of education. It's probably genetic. Our particular DNA just wants to replicate. I've got teenage grandsons, so I know what that could mean, you know. And I know even better because I was a teenager myself for about 30 years. Other mammals, lion and dolphin and baboon males have been known to kill the offspring of competing males to ensure that their own DNA is what gets successfully passed on. Sometimes that's called leadership. But Jesus said we can be born again. Born from above. We don't need to be determined by our biology. We don't need to be trapped by our fearful hatreds and prejudices, thinking somehow they're necessary to keep us safe. history of Europe in the 20th century should teach us that winning, it's not just not everything. It can, in fact, lead to even worse disasters. And remember that uncontrolled growth is what cancer is all about. Our nation, which began with Anglican economic ventures in Virginia, colonists in Massachusetts escaping religious persecution, French trappers on the rivers searching for beavers, Spanish soldiers searching for gold, refugees from everywhere searching for peace and prosperity. Our nation is a unique place that way. We've created the most diverse society in the history of human society, trying our best to face the challenges of an innate tribalism, and often catastrophically failing at that. And the only redemption possible, I think, for the sins of indigenous genocide or African slavery, the only healing possible for the deep wounds involved in the value conflicts that run from before the Civil War in the 1860s through the culture wars of the 1960s to the cable news, Facebook, and Twitter wars of the present time will be if we can find those better angels of our nature that Abraham Lincoln and Barack Obama and others have talked about, and become a kind of model for a diverse world where difference is cherished rather than feared, where the other is welcomed rather than attacked or caged. This may be our time. We begin with ourselves, sharing Christian life together, recognizing our different ways of understanding that with integrity, but still sharing, and then moving out beyond our gathered church communities. This may be our call. As Christians, we can provide a moral force and the spiritual power of love to a world that is crying out for moral guidance and in desperate, desperate need of love. Not minimizing the complexities of all this, or the work that it will certainly require, but knowing that the one we follow, as the letter to the Colossians tells us today, will provide us with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that we may lead lives worthy of Him, fully pleasing to Him, as we bear fruit in every good work, and as we grow in the knowledge of God, that we're made strong with the strength that comes from His glorious power, prepared to endure everything with patience, while joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has enabled us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. Thanks be to God.